Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Awesome Albums with Awesome Andrew. Today we are going to talk about Creedence Clearwater Revival and their 1970 album, Cosmo's Factory. As usual, before we get started, let's introduce the band. First up is John Fogerty, on lead guitar, lead vocals, piano, electric piano, keyboards, saxophone, and harmonica. He also acts as the producer and arranger. Tom Fogerty, John's older brother, on rhythm guitar and backing vocals. Stu Cook on bass and backing vocals, and Doug Clifford on drums and cowbell. Cosmo's Factory was the fifth album the band had made in just the span of about 2 years, but despite this album is far from tired. This is definitely one of the band's best albums. Alright, so in 1968 you had their debut album, and it was a pretty solid debut album. Then 1969 rolls around, and they already released another album. But then they made another album, so that's 2 albums in 1969. That's pretty impressive, but the Rolling Stones have done it, and that was the pattern of the early Beatles albums too. But then they blow us away yet again by making a third album in '69. Now you might be thinking, well, that's cool, but are they any good? Actually, yes. All 3 they made in '69 are fantastic, and I would love to cover all 3 of them at some point on this channel. Then we move to 1970, where they make another album, and that is where we're going to spend most of our time today. The band toured in Europe in 1970, even playing in the Royal Albert Hall to enthusiastic audiences, and had emerged as the most popular band in America. They ignored the common cliches of bands of that time, like acid trips and acid rock, which was very prominent in that time. Of course, that isn't to say they didn't have any criticism against them. Many rock critics dismissed them as a singles band with no substance. On the flip side, in a 2012 cover story, Uncut observed, while San Francisco longhairs across the bridge scoffed at commercialism, Creedence henceforth made a point of double A-sides, and invariably both songs would have an uncanny knack of cutting through all sections of the population. Take that, rock critics! Although I will say that their shows at that time were very consistent. So much so that their Live at Royal Albert Hall record was actually recorded in Oakland. This was because of one of John's policies, one of an increasing number of rules that he'd created to match his total control over the group's songs, production, and finances. His bandmates remembered just standing right off the side of the stage, thousands of fans screaming for more, and he denied the fans that encore because of his personal code. John Fogerty said, "As you probably know, the history of the band, I was a very strong leader, and I had a mountain, a whole room full of musical ideas. So I was sort of an unstoppable force. Basically, the hardest part was just getting the band up to speed musically so they could record and accomplish these songs, and also just to be in sync and on the same page, wanting to do it. As the success and time went on and got greater, there was more and more dissension within the band. You mentioned how other bands are. What happens then is you spend half your time in the political realm, meaning, well, I don't know if I want to do that song, or I want to come up with my own song. That takes time. There's a lot of time being consumed in bands where everybody's having their say. Then you have a meeting, you take a vote. You see what I'm getting at. But basically, Cosmo's Factory was really the very end of me being a very strong and very pure and very clear in my direction. And after that, the fine running machine was starting to get a little wobbly. Democracy's a wonderful thing, but as we all know in America, it's really hard to manage." End quote. So this, I guess, gives you a little insight on what John was getting at when trying to run the band the way he did. Not saying that what he was doing was right, or not right, but in a way, it kind of makes sense, and the results definitely speak for themselves. After touring Europe, they traveled back to San Francisco to record what many consider to be the finest CCR album released in July. Oh, and back to what I was saying with how many albums Creedence had been putting out, they weren't done making music in 1970. They also released their 6th album right at the end of the year in 1970. That's right, they made 6 albums in just 2 years, and they're all awesome. And then 1 album in '72, which we don't talk about that one. I think one of the reasons that this album is so good is that each song is so different, and I mean, they covered many different genres that were also their inspiration and foundation to the swamp rock that they were known for. They did R&B, soul, country, rockabilly, and even a little bit in psychedelia. John Fogerty reflects on the album and said, "When I did Cosmo's Factory, in my mind it was sort of, at the time, a culmination. I was really kind of going to pack it full. thinking that I was then going to turn a corner and go off in a new place. Unfortunately, there was so much tension within the band that the new place wasn't necessarily happy. When I look back now, I can sure see how pretty amazing Cosmo's Factory is. There's at least 6 charted singles on that album, and if you want to include Heard It Through the Grapevine, that's 7. I mean, that's kind of like Michael Jackson territory, but at the time, I just sort of took that in stride. That was what we were doing back then. End quote. Alright, let's dive into that album cover. The album cover shows the band in the studio. David Kavanagh of Uncut wrote in 2012, "The album's front cover showed the 4 of them caught by a camera in an off-duty moment. A proudly uncool quartet who looked more like lumberjacks than rock stars." End quote. The name came from the rehearsal space. They started rehearsing in a shed in Doug Clifford's backyard. He once said, "It was better than working in a factory." So the rehearsal rooms became known as the Factory. It was called the Factory because John made them practice there almost every day. They would play 5 days a week at a converted warehouse in Berkeley's industrial section. In 2013, Doug Clifford, nicknamed Cosmo, in case you were wondering about that, recalled to Goldmine, "John knew the press would be all over us for the album, so he would name the album after me and that I would have to deal with it. He wanted the pressure off of him. It was our biggest album ever, and I tell people they named it after me, so it had to be a hit. That's a joke." End quote. The back cover features the list of songs and a collection of photographs of the band members. The photos were taken by Bob Fogerty, John and Tom's brother. Now then, I'd say it's time to get the music going. The song opens with a jaunty country funk riff that almost sounds like a James Brown song once the band kicks in. Then they instantly go into a classic rockabilly style. Fogerty's guitar and howling vocals are both treated with the same ghostly slapback effort that he borrowed from Sun and Chess. He sings one of his signature apocalyptic scenes, fully of images of junk and ruin, described like Bad Moon Rising, but furious. The first verse lays down frustrations down in a simple manner with simple allusions. The first verse is interpreted of what is going on in your house and immediately around you, like the mortgage on your home. The verse moves a little further out than just your backyard and referring to the pressures of the modern world in the suburbs, and the police on the corner referring to the political chaos of the 1960s with all the riots going on. The tempo begins to slow down and then stops. The next 4 minutes of the song are instrumental with a psychedelic wall of sound. You can call this just a jam, but it has a direction, and that's what I love. For one, you can notice the lead guitar subtly getting louder, and I can hear some keyboards in there. The tempo, of course, slowly increases. Something I just love about Creedence is their natural tempo changes. Adds so much diversity to the song. Eventually, the song gets back to the full rockabilly section for the final verse, where the song is interpreted to spread out more than just your city, mostly focusing on DC and politics. Their selling independence has been interpreted with the Vietnam War, something that was going on. We were pretty much right smack dab in the middle of the Vietnam War in 1970. Creedence has also written songs about the war, so it's not a stretch that it could be about that. The next line has been interpreted as either actors in the White House, which is talking about the president just being an actor or a puppet, or Agnew's in the White House, referring to Vice President Spiro Agnew, VP to Richard Nixon. The song starts to slow down again as the song is about to end. One more fun fact of the song is this is technically the only new song for the album. You'll understand what I mean throughout this video. This is an old song written by Ellis McDaniel, which we all know as Bo Diddley. Creedence had previously recorded the song in 1968 during the recording sessions for their self-titled debut album. However, this outtake version was not released until the inclusion on the album's 40th anniversary edition as a bonus track. Early pressings of the album contained a 3-second dropout on the left stereo channel on this song. This is more of the soul side of CCR, and is a lot more simplistic than Ramble Tamble, but still a great song. Fogerty has a great vocal performance, who was one of the first white artists to be able to pull off black music convincingly and emotionally. Travelin Band is definitely 50s inspired, particularly Little Richard inspired. So much so that in October of 1972, the company that held the publishing rights to Little Richard's Good Golly Miss Molly felt that Travelin Band bore enough similarities to warrant a plagiarism lawsuit that was later settled out of court. Now, the thing I find weird about this is how Creedence did do a cover of Good Golly Miss Molly already on their first album, but I guess a cover is different than writing one song that sounds like another and claiming it as your own. This is not the only lawsuit I will be talking about in this video. I know I'm way past the opening line, but I want to go back and play this opening line.
737 coming out of the sky!
Referring to the Boeing 737, this song was placed on the list of post-9/11 inappropriate titles distributed by Clear Channel. The song has powerful vocals by John here, rivaling Little Richard of course, James Brown, I can see that, and Paul McCartney. This is one of the 3 double-sided singles from the album to reach the top 5 on the US Pop Singles chart, and the first of 2 to reach the number 2 spot on the American charts. It was also a hit in the UK, reaching number 8 on the UK Singles chart, released in January of 1970. The song is about the hectic lifestyle of CCR. In 1969, the band toured constantly and played many of the major famous festivals, including Woodstock. There was such a rush of excitement in going from place to place, but as Doug Clifford explained that their baggage was constantly getting lost. Baggage gone, oh well. And they spent a lot of time waiting around in the heat during these famous festivals. The traveling got a lot easier when they finally got their own private plane. A couple more facts about the song before I move on is an early pressings of the album contained an earlier mix of Travelin Band with Fogerty's first solo mixed behind the horn section. This version can be heard on the 40th anniversary edition of this album. Also, John did the instrumental parts himself. Once the basic track was cut, he went back into the studio and added many of the instrumental parts, including horns and piano, which he played himself.
Hey baby, jump over here when you do the Doobie Doobie.
Written by Wade Moore and Dick Penner, but made famous by Roy Orbison. Ooby Dooby. This song is just straight up rockabilly at its finest. Just listen to John shred on the guitar here. CCR effectively adds their own unique touch to Orbison's rockabilly style and makes a song that's energetic and fun. This song is a tribute to the Bakersfield Sound, a form of music that influenced Fogerty and the Creedence Sound. Buck Owens, one of the creators of the Bakersfield Sound, is even mentioned in the lyrics. John played a bit of dobro on this track. In case you're wondering what that is, that's the guitar thing he has on 1969's Green River. That thing. This is the only time he played it on a Creedence song. He bought one later in 1993 at a vintage guitar show and set out to master it, playing it for hours on end and using it on his 1997 solo album, Blue Moon Swamp. But back to Cosmo. This song is upbeat and filled with colorful imagery and often interpreted to be about drugs.
Tambourines and elephants are playing in the band. Won't you take a ride on the flying spoon?
Fogerty repeatedly stated in interviews that the song was actually written for his then 3-year-old son Josh. Fogerty had also said that the reference to a parade passing by was inspired by the Dr. Seuss book and To Think That I Saw It on Mulberry Street. This song was another single that peaked at number 2, released in June of 1970, and this was another song that featured really cool tempo changes. Just listen to the end of the song.
Looking out my back door.
The swamp rockiest, the most accurate depiction of the swamp rock sound on the album. Stu Cook said the song's opening and closing both featured jungle sound effects created by lots of backwards recording guitar and piano. This is the second lawsuit song related to this album, but the story here is pretty crazy. Back in 1984, John Fogerty wrote a song for the album Centerfield. Saul Zaentz, the boss of CCR's label Fantasy Records, brought up a series of lawsuits against Fogerty, including claims that The Old Man Down the Road was too similar to Run Through the Jungle. Okay, hold on. It's time out here. I'm sorry, but what did I just say? So, Saul Zaentz, the boss of Fantasy Records, who owns the rights to the Creedence songs, okay, sues a plagiarism lawsuit against John Fogerty, the singer and primary songwriter of Creedence, because the song he wrote on a solo album, The Old Man Down the Road, sounds enough like Run Through the Jungle, also written by Fogerty. How does this even make sense? Zaentz even won some of his claims against Fogerty that the songs sound enough alike, I guess. Well, yeah, that's going to happen when you write a couple different songs for them to sound similar if that's the style of music that you make. Of course they're going to sound similar. Even though Zaentz won some of the claims, he fortunately lost on the copyright issue because the judge found that an artist cannot plagiarize himself. Then, after winning the case, Fogerty turns around and sues Zaentz for the cost of defending himself against the copyright infringement claim. In such cases, prevailing defendants seeking compensation were bound to show that the original suit was frivolous or made in bad faith. Fogerty v. Fantasy Inc. became precedent when the United States Supreme Court in 1993 overturned lower court rulings and awarded attorney's fees to Fogerty without Fogerty having to show Zaentz' original suit was frivolous. Alright, let's put that music back on. Fogerty plays harmonica, which I think this is the only song on the album to feature it. This was another single to hit the charts. The single of Up Around the Bend, Run Through the Jungle climbed to number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart in May of 1970. It was also Creedence's biggest UK hit, charting at number 3 in June of that year. A lot of people interpret the song to be another protest song, which makes sense. Running through the jungles of Vietnam and the devil's on the loose, but John explained what the song is really about. In a 2016 interview, he explained that the song is actually about the proliferation of guns in the US. The thing I wanted to talk about was the gun control and the proliferation of guns. I remember reading around that time that there was one gun for every man, woman, and child in America, which I found staggering. So somewhere in the song, I think I said, 200 million guns loaded. Not that anyone else has the answer, but I did not have the answer to the question. I just had the question. I just thought it was disturbing that it was such a jungle for our citizens just to walk around in our own country, at least having to be aware that there are so many private guns owned by some responsible and maybe many irresponsible people." End quote. One last thing I want to say is that this was Tom Fogerty's favorite Creedence song. He said, "My all-time favorite Creedence tune was Run Through the Jungle. It's like a little movie in itself with all the sound effects. It never changes key, but it holds your interest the whole time. It's like a musician's dream. It never changes key, yet get the illusion it does." End quote. Like I just said a couple minutes ago, this is the flipside single to Jungle. So, as I said, it did pretty good on the charts, released in March of 1970. The song opens with a prominent, high-pitched guitar riff played by John. The lyrics have Fogerty telling of a gathering around the bend on the highway and inviting the listener to join in. The song is about a desire to escape the city and return to where the neons turn to wood, quoting the song, which is a very Creedence thing to say, if you ask me. The lyrics required a little bit of translation for British listeners. In England, if you go around the bend, it means you go crazy. Then when the band toured over there, they had to explain to the British press that the song was not about dementia or mental health problems. In 2016, Wrangler used this in a commercial for their jeans, surprising after John lashed out at them when they used Fortunate Son in ads without his permission back in 2000. Fogerty doesn't control the rights to the songs he wrote for CCR, so the songs can be used without his consent. My Baby Left Me, written by Arthur Crudup and made famous on Sun Records by Elvis Presley. They add their own style to this R&B song, but still remains an energetic one. This is the flip side to Travelin Band, which peaked at number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100. It was also ranked at number 188 on the Rolling Stone list 500 greatest songs of all time. I like how this is the flip side to Travelin Band because the two songs are so different. The song starts off with a ringing guitar riff, though the backing thought was more of a roots rock sound than that heard on more standard folk rock recordings. John Fogerty told Uncut's Tom Pinnock in 2012, "Travelin Band was my salute to Little Richard, but Who'll Stop the Rain was part of the fabric of the times. From 68 to 74, Vietnam was probably the most important thing on the minds of the young people." End quote. The song has often been interpreted as a war song, the rain being bombs falling and napalm strikes in Vietnam. Other interpretations say the rain refers to misinformation and disinformation and ignorance that we all get bombarded with from all corners of society, not just politicians. Others interpret it as the breakup of CCR just 2 years later, that John can see it coming from the internal strife, business deals gone bad, etc. John said no other members of the band knew the true meaning of the song. Woodstock, Vietnam, and all other theories are just wrong speculation. John Fogerty said in a 2007 concert in Melbourne, Vermont, "Well, this next song has a bit of a fable surrounding it. A lot of folks seem to think I sang the song at Woodstock way back then. No, I was at Woodstock in 1969, I think. It was a nice event. I'm a California kid. I went up there and saw a bunch of really nice young people, hairy, colorful. It started to rain and got really muddy. Then 500,000 people took their clothes off. Boomer generation making its presence known, I guess. Anyway, then I went home and wrote the song." The song's universal topical appeal made it unusual for the time and gives it a quality that helps it maintain its popularity 40 years later. John was quoted as saying, "Certainly, I was talking about Washington when I wrote the song, but I remember bringing the master version of the song home and playing. My son Josh was 4 years old at the time, and after he heard it, he said, 'Daddy, stop the rain.' And my wife and I looked at each other and said, 'Well, not quite,'" end quote. I find this quote adorable.
I went down Virginia, seeking shelter from the storm.
This line is interesting because it gave Bob Dylan the idea for the title of his 1975 song, "Shelter from the Storm."
I came in from the wilderness, a creature void of form. Come in, she said, I'll give you shelter from the storm.
The song also inspired the title of a 1978 film starring Nick Nolte, which saw its name changed from Dog Soldiers when the song became available for use. Creedence songs have actually been in several film and commercials, like I mentioned earlier, because Fogerty long ago signed away legal control of his old recordings to Creedence's record label, Fantasy Records. That was a quote. Fogerty objected to what he regarded as a misuse of his music in an NPR interview. Folks will remember Forrest Gump, and that was a great movie, but they don't remember all the really poor movies that Fantasy Records stuck Creedence music into. Car commercials, tire commercials. I'm remembering a paint thinner ad at one point, which, to break the quote here, was actually Thompson's Water Seal. Back to the quote. The song, "Who'll Stop the Rain?" Oh boy, that's clever, isn't it? End quote. The last 30 seconds or so have a long fade out which reprises the repeating guitar riff from the intro. It kind of, to me, feels that it's reinforcing the song's theme of the rain continuing on forever, that who's going to stop it? Nobody has stopped it yet, I guess. The song is just pure awesomeness from beginning to end. I absolutely love this song. This is also the longest song in the Creedence discography at just a little over 11 minutes. You'll probably recognize the song as the California Raisin song back in the 80s, done by Buddy Miles.
California raisins from the California vineyards.
I'm sure you know what it means to hear it through the grapevine, but just in case you don't, it basically means that you find something out through gossip or rumor, usually passed by word of mouth from your friends. The lyrics are pretty obvious. A guy found out his girlfriend was cheating on him from his friends. I feel this song is kind of the opposite of Ramble Tamble, the two long songs on the album. One is upbeat, though angry, and this is a Motown cover and a droning, claustrophobic, almost blues song. There is an interpretation that I read that the song is a murder ballad. The longer the song goes on, the more the feeling of dread increases. Well, I guess they made it in a different way when they say "No longer will you be mine." Stu Cook told Bill Kopp of MusicScribe.com, each album had a longish track on it, but they were never jams per se. Heard It Through the Grapevine had a little jammy character to it, but they were all pretty structured. there was no space to noodle. Live, there was a little bit of noodling, but in the studio, we always tried to nail the arrangement." End quote. The final track on the album, as well as the final single that I'll be talking about in today's video, the flip side to Backdoor. The single reached number 2 on the Hot 100. An interpretation of the song is about a guy who has to go away because he's lost sense of himself, but wants to let his girl know that he'll be back if she'll have him. About having to go somewhere to do something that you may or may not be afraid to do, and knowing that when you're done with that, someone is going to be home waiting for you. It could be written about a man who's going on tour, a lot of musicians do that, or it could be about a man who's leaving to go to war. It's a slow song with a heavy sax, but I feel it's the perfect way to close the album. AllMusic states, "Long as I can see the light, the record's final song, he again finds solace and home, anchored by a soulful, laid-back groove. It hits a comforting elegia note, the perfect way to draw Cosmo's Factory, an album made during stress and chaos, filled with raging rockers, covers, and intense jams, to a close." End quote.
Long as I see the light.
Another great album. And to recap, this album had 6 singles, and that's unheard of. And then there was also a single made of Grapevine, so that's 7 singles for a single album? That's even more unheard of. But it just goes to show just how amazing this album was and the impact that it left. I also thought it was funny that when you take out the cover songs, Before You Accuse Me, Ooby Dooby, My Baby Left Me, and Heard It Through the Grapevine, that just leaves 7 songs. And of those 7 songs, Travelin Band with Who'll Stop the Rain, Looking Out My Back Door with Long as I Can See the Light, and Up Around the Bend with Run Through the Jungle, that leaves just Ramble Tamble as the only new song made when the album came out. But considering how well these singles did, and then putting all those singles together on one single album, that's almost like having a greatest hits in a way, isn't it? I mean, it feels about as good as one. In 2003, the album was ranked at number 265 on Rolling Stone magazine's list of the 500 greatest albums of all time. It reached certified gold for selling over 500,000 copies by December 16th of 1970. Then, almost 20 years later, on December 13th, 1990, that number went way up, giving it a certification of 4 times platinum for selling over 400 million copies. In August of 1970, CCR started a 9-week run at number 1 on the US album chart with Cosmo. It also became their only album to reach number 1 in the UK, and equaled that feat in the US, where it stayed in the charts for 69 weeks. The main takeaway here, I guess, is how I usually end my videos, by saying that this is Awesome Andrew telling you that Creedence Clearwater Revival's Cosmo's Factory is an awesome album, and I will see you all next time. And Doug Clifford on drugs, and Doug Clifford on drums and cowbell.